Welcome to the Business of Biotech, brought to you by Bioprocess Online and graciously sponsored by Cytiva, formerly GE Healthcare Life Sciences. On our last episode, we dug deep on finding funding in volatile times with Dr. Bert Lang. Today, we'll discuss one of the most important things you can do with that funding once it's secured. I'll speak with a biopharma founder whose 20 distinct startups are producing several dozen therapeutic candidates ranging from discovery to phase 3. He's hired a lot of great people to take those companies through clinical success, and he's here today for a conversation about building an all-star biotech team. Let's give it a listen. Joining us today is Vivek Ramaswamy, who has quite a bit of experience in building all-star biosciences teams. He's got a background, I think, correct me, Vivek, welcome to the show, first of all. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, our pleasure. So correct me if I get any of this wrong. You started out your career sort of on the finance side, if I'm not mistaken. You had finance experience at Campus Venture Network and QVT Financial before moving into a board position with Axovant. You were the chairman at Arbutus. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah, and it was all part of leaving my career as an investor to start Roivant Sciences, which is the parent company of a series of children companies that we built out of that platform. And Axovant was the first of those, and then there have been 19 others since then. Yeah.
I picked up on that. It's a very interesting structure that you've created. So Roivant has dozens and dozens of candidates in the pipeline, anywhere from preclinical to I think phase 3, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
And each of those candidates sits within I don't know how many different sort of child companies.
There's 20. There's 20 today that are part of the Roivant family.
Yeah, it's a very interesting structure. So, as you can imagine, I mean, in building out each of those, you've had to do some team building for sure.
Yeah.
So that's the topic of our conversation today, around building an all-star team for your emerging biosciences biotech company. And as we discussed earlier, I want to make sure that we have the opportunity to talk about building those teams in this extraordinary time that we're in, and how the impact of the pandemic is affecting the ability for companies like those that you run and have run to build all-star biotech teams. But I want to start just by kind of getting your thoughts around, when you're a new CEO, a new leader of a new company, and you've got a lot to manage. You've got finances to manage, you've got the science to manage, you've got the markets to manage. Where does building the team and the valuation goals of that team, where does that kind of fit into your mentality as a leader of a newer emerging biopharma?
Sure. I'd be happy to talk about that. I think about things pretty simply. I think that if you're building a biotech company, there's 3 ingredients that matter. There's the drug assets, there's the money, and there's the people. Those are the 3 ingredients required to build a biotech company successfully. You can't do it successfully without any of those 3. I'd say that the most fundamental of those is the people, in that they are the ones who turn chemical entities into drugs. And without people, you can't marshal the resources, including the capital needed to pursue those projects. So I'd put people at most fundamental. I'd say selection of drugs as second most fundamental. And then the money is just a means to accomplish the end. And so that's a long way of saying, I think that perhaps this is true in any field and isn't unique to biopharma, but I can tell you from my experience in biopharma that it definitely applies to us, that the selection of the right people and the retention and motivation of the right people is the most fundamental element to our long run success. And now we're, it's a different vantage point than I had 6 years ago when we got started. Today we're not certainly not a large pharma company, but we're not a small startup anymore either. We're somewhere in between the two, and I think it's as true today as it was at the beginning.
Yeah. Each of the sort of sub companies under Roivant, the children, as you referenced them, do they kind of run autonomously at all with kind of startup mentalities of their own as it relates to building teams out?
Yeah, so I think that's the whole point of the model, is to preserve the elements of entrepreneurial, nimble, scrappy startup culture while still doing that at scale and deriving some of the benefits of scale. For example, in our case, the biggest one that we really invest in is technology that small companies generally don't have enough resources to invest in for themselves. We invest in that centrally and derive the benefits of that over the long run for each of our children companies, what we call Vants.
Yeah.
And so over the long run, even as we do become a large cap pharma company one day, it will be hopefully by preserving some of the elements of a nimble entrepreneurial biotech even at large scale as well.
Yeah. Okay. So when you're assembling a team, and as I said, you've got plenty of experience in each of these different sort of companies. When you're assembling a team, obviously there are cost control decisions to be made. You can't just sign Michael Jordan and Scotty. I'm dating myself. Michael Jordan, Scotty Pippen. You can't sign your all stars on all at once. You've got to kind of do that responsibly. What have you learned through all of these exercises around who to plug in and when by role? So when you look at specific roles that are necessary along the continuum, who do you plug in and when? Maybe what mistakes have you made and what have you learned along the way?
Yeah, I think one of the things I've learned along the way is that unlike perhaps other elements of building a business, certainly the people side doesn't lend itself to a formula. I think different people work better in different settings and with other people in a way that really can't be predicted. And so, in a certain sense, we've been building these Vants. We've built 20 of them. But I think if I've learned one thing, unlike building a widget, I think building up a team or building up a small biotech company, as we've conceived them from scratch, is not something that lends itself to scalability through some formula. I think that certain people are successful in certain circumstances, and if you change those circumstances by just a little bit, they're no longer at their best. I guess to borrow your analogy, I think the same is probably true in basketball. You have people who are stars on one team and then they get traded and they work their way down to the bench. And it wasn't necessarily that their inherent athleticism or skill was any different, but the context in which they were playing made all the difference for how they performed. So I think that's sort of the first lesson. And I think the second lesson, which is somewhat related actually, is that hiring on the basis of resume is a tough thing to do, because that same principle applies where if you're looking at past performance as an indicator of future performance, that's a dangerous assumption to make when, again, success is so circumstance specific, and you put somebody who happened to succeed by combination of effort or luck or the right circumstances aligning or whatever in a prior setting, that doesn't mean they're necessarily going to succeed in the same way in a new setting when a number of variables have changed. And conversely, just because someone has failed in a prior setting, especially in our business, drugs fail for all kinds of reasons. Even if people do an extraordinary job, that means very little for whether or not they're going to be able to succeed in a future setting armed with the right toolkit. So those are, I think, a couple of the lessons I've learned along the way, is that there's no formula to this.
Okay. So in terms of the culture of your company and what you can manipulate around the value proposition to new talent, what do you do? I mean, what do you do to strategically make sure that you're creating a place that's welcoming and attractive to those people who you want to bring onto the team, regardless, of what role?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've learned is you can't, overemphasize enough times why it is you're doing what you're doing as a company. And I think that one of the things that's easy to forget as a leader is that people have their unique role in the organization, but can quickly get into the day-to-day elements of their job in terms of their unique piece of the broader puzzle, and can often then forget what the bigger puzzle is all about while just focusing on their unique piece of it. And so I think one of the jobs of a good leader is to remind everyone of the broader puzzle, and to make clear to them where their contributions actually fit in. I think that's actually one of the most important elements to building a thriving culture is ultimately reminding people of the connection between what they do and the broader objective of what the whole company or the whole enterprise or the whole mission of whatever organization it is all about. Mm-hmm. That's just one element. I'm happy to talk about others as well, but that's probably, one of the biggest picture ones I can think of right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good one to pause on for a minute, because the objective of companies in our space, the mission of companies in our space, just over the course of the last month, has in many cases changed or shifted anyway, to kind of focus on COVID-19, the pandemic that we're facing globally. It's March 30th, by the way. This episode will air later, but at this point we haven't yet reached the peak here in the United States, and surely this unprecedented event that we're looking at right now has one, as I said, not only changed or shifted the mission of a lot of biopharma companies who are now looking at their molecules to see, what can we do to kind of help this problem, but also it certainly has shifted the landscape in terms of talent acquisition. I mean, people are maybe harder to come by now. Maybe the market is more open. I don't know. You tell me. I guess this is a long-winded way of getting to the question. How has the situation that we're facing with the pandemic impacted one, Roivant's mission, and two, your ability to attract and acquire talent in this space?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think I'd comment on a couple things there. I think I like the way you said it, but I think the one thing I would add is that I don't know that I would say it's changed the mission of companies. The mission of companies is to develop therapeutics for patients who need them. And it's right now, the thing we've seen is a precipitous change in what this need really is globally. I think right now at the top of that list is this acute emergency in the United States and in other countries. And so the companies are able to realize their mission through a more focused means right now. So in a certain sense, it's hardly a change in the mission, but just an occasion and a catalyst to remember and remind ourselves of what our actual mission is all about day in and day out anyway. And I think that even after this crisis passes, whether it's tackling Alzheimer's disease or the consequences of cardiometabolic disease or other unaddressed important diseases that we haven't yet, I think paid enough attention to as a society. I think in a certain sense, I hope that for pharma, this crisis and the ability to rise to the occasion with COVID-19 will sharpen our sense and our employees' sense of what it is we're doing day in and day out anyway. I think it has already had that effect on employees at Roivant. I can see it. I can hear it in terms of the conversations we're having, even on programs unrelated to our efforts in COVID-19. And I hope that outlives this moment. I think it will. Mm-hmm. I think that being said, I think this has also created some challenges for us, like it has for every biopharma company, like it has for every company around the world. On one hand, we have certain parts of our company that have had to put pause on a lot of projects. I think that a number of our clinical trials, unsurprisingly, are facing some headwinds where the hospital sites are experiencing, or even the sites broadly are experiencing interruptions, are not seeing patients in the same way, are closed except for certain numbers of cases that they have prioritized. That's a disruption to a clinical trial for patient recruitment, in some cases even for ongoing visits. That's a big deal. And I think it's not only a big deal for us, it's a big deal across the industry. I think in the last week, we've seen a number of the larger pharma companies just say they're not even starting new clinical trials until this COVID-19 crisis passes. That creates business interruptions. You have large numbers of employees who are allocated to a project who are now sitting on their hands. Not only is that inefficient for the business, that's also frustrating to those employees. And I think that that's, I think that's something that we as leaders ought to think about, is really understand that just because someone had their project taken out from under them, it's not exactly a vacation environment. It's in the context of a crisis that has people in their homes, disconnected from others, and now you take their project away from them or put it on hold, or a trial they were about to start and told them we're delaying it by 6 months. I think that there's a real motivational effect to think about on the one hand. I think that's on the challenge side. On the opportunity side, what we did is we were fortunate enough, I think, to have one therapy at least in our pipeline that could have direct applicability to severe COVID-19 patients based on some of the emerging data coming out of China, looking at the biological target of this monoclonal antibody in our pipeline. We think it has a strong biological rationale, or at least hypothesis, for potentially having an impact on severe COVID-19 patients so as to justify taking it into clinical development very rapidly. And I think one of the things that we did was to transition resources from one part of the company where we weren't probably going to be moving at the same pace that we're used to moving, and deploying them on this project. And that team of about, I don't know how many people it is, maybe 25, 30 people who have been working on this, have been as motivated a group as I have ever seen on a drug development project, working around the clock literally, because it's with regulators at different time zones in different parts of the world, to advance and mobilize this therapeutic in a matter of days to weeks for something that would have normally taken months and potentially many months. Mm-hmm. And so I think that we've seen both the challenges from a talent management standpoint and motivation standpoint, but also the sense of motivation that people take from having the ability to make a unique difference during a time of crisis. And I think if there's a moment that arises from time to time where we can say to biopharma, this is your moment, I think the COVID-19 crisis is one of those rare occasions.
Yeah. It's it speaks back to the point you made earlier about making sure that your team is mission centric, cognizant of the mission every day, and certainly it's never been a more, I guess it's never been more acute. I mean, it's easy to do that at this point, and I wish you well on that project. By the way, it's encouraging news.
Thank you.
The Business of Biotech podcast is dedicated to helping new and emerging biopharma leaders navigate the organizational, financial, and regulatory aspects of the biotherapeutics market landscape. So is Cytiva, the company formerly known as GE Healthcare Life Sciences, and the gracious underwriters of this project. Find out how Cytiva is helping life science researchers and biopharmaceutical manufacturers evolve how new therapies and precision medicines are discovered, made, and used at www.cytiva.com. That's www.cytiva.com. So you're calling right now you're in Ohio?
I'm in Ohio right now, yeah.
Where in Ohio?
I'm in Cincinnati, Ohio. It's where I grew up. I was
Okay.
born and raised here, and in what I think of as home has always been here. Yeah.
Okay. And so it kind of plays into, the next question I had for you around geography. So you're in Cincinnati, Ohio, not necessarily, known globally as a biotech hub, although I'm sure, like many other cities, there's a growing and thriving biotech scene there. How does your geography and the geography of your companies play into your ability to acquire talent?
Yeah, so I think that it is an important element, but I think a less and less important element by the day. And I'm laughing because I think that this crisis is sort of teaching us a new way of working as well. So most of our employees are based in New York. We have employees out in the West Coast. I frequently travel to see all of them, both at Roivant and our vans. And right now, none of them, wherever they are going into the office anywhere. And it has forced us to do something that we kind of were doing already in terms of connecting via, means like we are right now. We're in a Zoom conference for this podcast. Well, we've been doing that day in and day out for the last several weeks in running our normal one-on-one meetings, our management meetings, our company town halls. We just had a company town hall via Zoom with hundreds of people on it last Friday. So in a certain sense, I think that there's no replacement for being under the same roof as the people you're working with day to day. But at the same time, I think this will be a catalyst for us and for a bunch of other companies to really look at the importance of connectivity between teams as more important than the geographic proximity between those teams. Because I do think it's possible entirely to have a situation where you're geographically co-located and not in sync at all. Mm-hmm. And you could have the opposite extreme where you're in total synchronization as a team with a very clear set of objectives, a very clear set of who's doing what, a clear sense of connectivity, but you happen to be in different places. Yeah. And so I think that, for better or worse, I think that these few months right now in the middle of this COVID-19 epidemic is certainly teaching our company how to make that work. And I think that will have benefits that outlive even this crisis.
Yeah. Side note, we've been using Zoom extensively as well to conduct operations as we all work from home. And on Friday, this past Friday at 3:30, we actually had our editorial team had a virtual happy hour. Mm-hmm. We all got together and just visited, and
cool.
Everyone had a beer, and it was actually quite fun.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. So related to that, as the crisis that we're experiencing right now sort of accelerates the move toward virtual workspaces and virtual work environment, do you see an acceleration of biopharma's ability or strategy? Is there strategy in also moving towards more 1099 employees or full and part-time or consultative arrangements as opposed to building a concrete team at a specific place of full-time employees, that kind of thing? I mean, do you think there's any strategy in extending that I guess the flexibility of hiring arrangements?
I do see that. I don't think that's unique to that. I don't think that has anything, in my view, at least, to do with this COVID-19 crisis. I do think that that's a trend we've begun to see even among larger companies. I'm personally maybe a little bit more guarded about that. Of course, we use consultants. Of course, we rely on consultants and part-time workers all the time. I do think that there is something to be said, though, for having yourself wear a primary hat of allegiance that day to day, when you think about what you do, there's a difference between a singular mission of one company that you're contributing to, kind of having that clear sense, as I said earlier, of where your piece of the puzzle fits into the broader puzzle, versus you having being a piece of a puzzle that fits into different ways for multiple different puzzles. And that's not like that is, for example, let's say you're a consultant for multiple different companies, each of which are different from one another. That's not to say one is better or worse than the other. It's just to say that there's still a difference. And I don't think that this particular COVID-19 crisis or any other unique event is going to change that difference. I just think it's worth keeping that in mind. And what that means is you motivate your consultants and you motivate your part-time workers, et cetera, in different ways, or in ways that, remind them that while they're working for you and while they're wearing the Roivant hat, for example, or whatever other company they might be working for, that you really give them a sense of where their work fits in so that it just doesn't become a cog in the wheel, because I think that's at risk of that's where you begin to take the risk of, if the cog is off by half, then the wheel doesn't run as smoothly.
Okay, let's shift to the C-suite. So we've spent quite a bit of time talking about science level employees and strategy. What about the C-suite? I mean, you've taken companies through points of maturation where perhaps you've recognized and made changes yourself in the C-suite around when it's time for a leadership change, whether it's the CEO, the CFO, take your pick. What are some of the indicators that you've learned along the way that it might be time to make some changes in the front office?
Yeah, I think that one leading indicator for me is when someone is no longer as hungry as when they started. That's when it's time for a change. I think that in a certain sense, many people really have a sense of eagerness and a sense of hunger when they take on a new role or responsibility. And I think it's right when that sense of fresh ambition, that sense of fresh enthusiasm begins to go stale even a little bit, that it's time to begin thinking about a role change. And I think that applies in two directions. One is for the company, putting someone in that role who, including in a C-suite role, who brings that hunger back. Because I think that if I had to take the trade-off between experience, the person who's in the role already necessarily has that experience, versus the person who doesn't have the experience, but has the hunger, I think I would go for hunger over experience every time. But there's two sides to the coin. I think that, one of the unique things about our model is that it's pretty flexible, and that we have lots of different vants. We have 20 different vants. We have a parent company, Roivant. That's a meaningful operation in its own right, with hundreds of employees and open positions of its own, that, you don't just, I think at a normal company environment, maybe someone's not in the role, you toss them out. Here, I think we really take a look at what's next for you is as important a question as who's next for this role. So I think those are two questions that go hand in hand.
Yeah, that's again, it is a very unique structure that you've got there. And I can see where that plays to your advantage in terms of HR strategy. When you look across the portfolio of companies and you think about the distinction between your people and your IP, if you do see a distinction, I mean, in a lot of cases, your people are your intellectual property. How do you go about protecting and managing both of those things, your people and your IP?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that in terms of protecting people, I mean, this is, again, a great example of it, making sure that our employees are staying healthy, this being the time we're in, make sure that remind people of what they can do to keep themselves healthy, remind people of what they can do to keep themselves not only healthy from COVID-19, but healthy from all of the other, difficulties, even I would just say psychosocial difficulties of working alone, being isolated, being disconnected in a way that's different from normal working environments. I think that that's a good occasion today. I mean, I think the period we're in to think about, in challenging circumstances, what do you do as a company to step up to really make sure that your employees are invigorated and connected in a way that, in a way that they want to be, but may need some help with. I think that that's something that you got to think about as a leader. In terms of protecting your IP, look, I have nothing particularly unique to say there, other than, we have a pretty robust system in the United States and other parts of the developed world. In biopharma in particular, we're lucky to have that, where we have a clear system that offers clear incentives and rewards to companies that really innovate, that companies that discover and identify and develop new medicines that have the potential to change lives. We have all things considered, a pretty clear system for how to protect that IP. And I think that, it's up to us to do our part in prosecuting that IP, but also I think there's a benefit actually to bring it back, to potentially share some of that IP within bounds, in the sense that, you might have a situation where multiple different companies are going after the same biological target, and putting out data in real time is maybe something that doesn't necessarily help you differentially, but could help the entire field. But if everyone is engaging in that same type of behavior as a norm, then everyone stands to benefit. And so I think you have a friendlier system of competition in biopharma than you might see in other fields like hard technology, where you keep, your data points, your results, a total secret, because if you do, someone else could put you out of business. Here, I think because of the robust system of IP protection that we have, that are specific to molecules often, you've actually fostered an environment for this friendlier competition between companies that I think ultimately leaves the state of science and, most importantly, patient interests better off for it. So I think I could offer plenty of critiques, but at a high level, my net view on all of this is actually pretty positive.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so I know we're running short on time here, Vivek, but I wanted to just hit on one last question and then give you an opportunity to share some concluding thoughts. But the audience for this series is primarily first-time CEOs, first-time biopharma leaders, and with that in mind, we have a very finance kind of heavy focus, right? So we're always looking for new finance opportunities. It's easy to say, you know, building a company valuation for the investment community is directly connected to your talent, your team, right? Like, to use my terrible 1990s basketball analogy, if I've got Michael Jordan on my team, I'm probably going to get some investment community attention. Let's peel that back just a little bit, and I want to get your thoughts on kind of your strategic approach to building company valuation via the people you put on your team. It's not just like, hey, you know, go out and buy a bunch of all-stars. Where along the way does that, I guess, have you developed a strategy to kind of connect those 2 points and leverage your team as a point of company valuation and further financing?
Sure. So look, I think that in the short run, there's a lot of companies, even in recent years, that have gone public, that have raised capital, whatever, on the back of somebody who had a big track record and name that was added again. I think that actually it's pretty interesting if you look at the history of biotech companies over the last 20 years. The direct translation of success previously to success again is actually lower than you might expect, because a lot of times, as I said earlier, someone can do their job really well, but the drug can fail. And someone can do their job okay, but if they're part of a full team that did its job effectively and the drug succeeded, then that's great in that occasion, but it may not necessarily translate to the future when you put that same person on a different team. Mm-hmm. So I think that, you know, a short run move that I think some companies and VCs, et cetera, have made is to bring in a well-recognized or celebrated name. And I think that we've learned over the course of our life as a company too. I think we've had people who are unknown. We've had people who are big names, and, you know, we've had people in both buckets that have succeeded and people in both buckets that, you know, probably weren't, you know, put in a position or to succeed, or for whatever reason didn't succeed. So I think that would not be the strategy that I would recommend for thinking about building a team and the connection between building a team and raising capital. Instead, I actually go in a different direction, which is to say that the best way the connection between building a successful team and raising capital is demonstrating in that context, doing what you said you were going to do. Mm-hmm. So initially, you may not raise as much capital as you wanted or at the valuation you wanted, but with what you have, you demonstrate that in that setting, you as that person in that company did the thing you said you were going to do. And then you're able to then raise more capital at a better value, and then go out and do what you said you were going to do in that setting. Then you go out and do it again. I think that is, a more lasting and reliable way to be able to build value, to accrete valuation, to be able to raise more capital, specifically in that setting that isn't just a short run move, but actually has long-term lasting repeatability associated with it. So that's what I would say, is focusing less on translating prior resumes into indicators of future performance, and instead use performance in the current setting that you're in as the best indicator for future performance in the current setting that you're in.
I like
it. Sense?
It does. I like it. Yeah. Thank you. Good. So again, we're just about out of time, but I want to give you an opportunity to share concluding thoughts, kind of wrap this up with a pretty bow. If there are any points we didn't get to that you wanted to hit on, that was a great time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know when you're going to air this, but like you said, we're sitting right now at the end of March at a very difficult time in our country and for the world. I think it is a time that challenges leaders of companies, as it challenges, you know, nearly everyone in our society right now to fight our way through a crisis that we haven't seen probably in over a century, and most of us haven't seen in our lifetime. And I think that that's a challenge in many ways, but I also think it is an opportunity to remember why it is we do what we do, what's most important about what we do. And I think that in a certain sense, I'm hopeful that we'll see a greater sense of unity in our industry and even in our society at large as a consequence of having faced this challenge together. And so, I hope that people in this time of adversity realize that in many times in life and in business generally, and in business in particular, some of the greatest opportunities are born out of times of adversity. And though it may be difficult to see now, I'm confident that this time will be no exception.
Well said, Vivek. Perfect place to end. I appreciate that. I wish you well. I wish you luck. I wish your company luck, and stay healthy and keep up the good work.
Same to you. Thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye.
That's Dr. Vivek Ramaswamy. I'm Matt Pillar, and this is the Business of Biotech, produced by Bioprocess Online and graciously sponsored by Cytiva, formerly GE Healthcare Life Sciences. If you like what you heard here today, please subscribe. Give us 5 stars. And be sure to subscribe to the Bioprocess Online newsletter at bioprocessonline.com. Tune in next time for a candid conversation on knowing when it's time to spread your wings and leave the comfort of the incubator with Kavita Ayers Rodriguez, a founder who's done just that on several occasions. In the meantime, thanks for listening.